June 23, 1943.0700 hours. Russell Islands, Solomon Chain. Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn watched the awkward-looking aircraft hop along the coral A-strip, its enormous nose blocking all forward vision until the tail finally rose. The F4U Corsair resembled a flying oil drum with wings bolted on. Japanese pilots who encountered it nicknamed it Whistling Death, not out of terror, but because they thought it was hilarious. 3000 miles away in Tokyo, Commander Minoru Genda examined the newest intelligence updates from the Pacific. American aviators were being lost in their brand-new fighter at a shocking pace. The Corsair was killing Marines in training faster than the Zero was killing them in actual combat. Its stall behavior was so brutal that the U.S. Navy had refused to operate it from carriers altogether. Japan's top naval fighter pilot couldn't hide his amusement. The Americans had designed a machine so treacherous that they feared flying it more than fighting in it. The arithmetic of air combat in 1943 seemed firmly on Japan's side. The Mitsubishi Zero could outturn any American aircraft, outclimb nearly all of them, and in the hands of veterans hardened since the China conflict, it was practically untouchable in a dogfight. Japanese flyers averaged over 800 hours in the air. They were schooled in a warrior creed: one aircraft, one pilot, one kill. The Zero was viewed as an extension of the pilot himself, a blade in the sky. Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Sakai, Japan's top ace with 64 victories, had once evaluated a captured F4F Wildcat. "It felt like driving a truck," he wrote. "Heavy, sluggish on controls, and with awful visibility." The Americans built planes the same way they built automobiles, pure metal and brute force, lacking elegance. When word arrived of an even larger, bulkier U.S. fighter entering service, experienced Zero pilots at Rabaul literally cheered. The Americans, they said, were making their aircraft even fatter and more unwieldy. The first Corsair units appeared in the Pacific in February 1943. Marine Fighting Squadron 124, the first outfit to fly the new machine, lost more aircraft to mishaps than to the enemy in its opening month. The 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine twisted the plane so violently that takeoff became fistfights with the controls. The long snout left pilots blind until airborne. The stiff landing gear turned bounce landings into wrecks. Major Gregory Boyington, who would later lead the famed Black Sheep Squadron, barely survived his first Corsair landing. "The damn thing dropped like a stone at 17 knots, he said. "One moment you're flying, the next you're falling. No warning. Just bang, and you're dropping out of the sky." The stall was so savage that pilots dubbed it the Ensign Eliminator. In the first 6 months, the U.S. lost more Corsairs to accidents than to every enemy engagement combined. Japanese intelligence followed every one of those losses. Lieutenant Commander Teao Tanamu at Rabaul analyzed each crash report. The Americans, he believed, were destroying themselves. Their new fighter was so treacherous that Japanese pilots joke about awarding the Vought Company medal for building such a pilot killer. But then something unexpected began showing up in combat debriefs. Zeros were vanishing. Not in close-quarters turning fights, where Japanese skill dominated, but in high-speed dives where they never even glimpsed their attackers. Surviving pilots spoke of a new noise, a distinctive whistle from the Corsair's oil coolers set into the wing roots. And by the time that eerie sound reached them, it was almost always too late. Lieutenant Ken Walsh of VMF 124 uncovered the Corsair's real potential by pure accident. On May 13, 1943, when he was jumped by 3 Zeros over the Russell Islands, he did the one thing every Corsair instructor warned never to attempt. He tried to turn with them. The Zeros immediately began to outmaneuver him. With no other hope, Walsh shoved the throttle forward and pushed the nose down. The Corsair surged ahead with a ferocity he had never imagined. The A-speed needle swept past 400 knots, then 420, then 440. The controls stayed firm. The airframe did not shudder. When Walsh finally pulled out of the dive and glanced behind him, the Zeros had vanished, not destroyed, but far out of reach. Their fragile design made following such a brutal dive impossible. They clawed back altitude using the enormous speed he'd gained, then rolled over and dove again on the unsuspecting Zeros. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, each spitting 800 rounds a minute, met at a 300-yard convergence point. The first Zero disintegrated instantly. The second erupted in fire. The third tried to dive away, but the Corsair chased it down as if pulled by gravity itself. The arithmetic of aerial warfare was being rewritten in real time. Combat was no longer about tight turning circles. It was no longer a graceful dance. It had become a matter of speed, altitude, and raw striking power. The Corsair could climb to 25,000 feet faster than a Zero could struggle its way to 20,000. It could dive at velocities that would rip a Zero's wings off. And those 6 heavy machine guns delivered more destructive mass in 3 seconds than a Zero could manage in 10. Commander Gender began receiving unsettling dispatches in July 1943. Entire formations of Zeros were being struck from above by Corsairs they never spotted. American pilots had adopted entirely new methods. No more circling duels. No more weaving engagements. They stayed high, dove hard, fired, and used their horsepower advantage to climb right back out. If they missed, they didn't turn, just climbed and prepared another plunge. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nishizawa, Japan's most lethal ace with over 100 kills, met Corsairs for the first time on August 7, 1943. They dropped out of the sun, he wrote. When we noticed them, they were already shooting. Suzuki's aircraft blew apart. Erita went down burning. I pulled left as hard as I could, but the American didn't follow. He simply climbed away. I could not reach him. My Zero felt frozen in the air. Kill ratios began to swing violently. Early in 1943, Zeros held a 3-to-1 advantage over U.S. fighters. By September, Corsairs were claiming 7-to-1 success against Zeros. The mathematics weren't shifting. They were overturning entirely. Marine Captain Robert Hansen destroyed 20 Zeros in 6 weeks with the Corsair. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh racked up 21 victories in just 3 months. These weren't chance encounters. They were deliberate, calculated takedowns. The 6.50 caliber guns were a huge part of the transformation. Each half-inch round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. A single 1-second burst could throw 80 rounds into a target. The Zero's featherlight framework, so vital for its agility, offered almost no protection. Armor-piercing incendiary bullets ripped through aluminum like cardboard. A single strike in a fuel tank meant instant fireball. The self-sealing fuel cells that kept American pilots alive were far too heavy for the Zero's weight-obsessed design. Chief Petty Officer Toshio Tie, a ground crew chief at Rabaul, watched crippled Zeros limp home after battle. The holes were different, he recalled. American .40 caliber bullets made neat little punctures. These .50 caliber rounds tore whole pieces away. Wings with gaps big enough to fit your head through. Fuselages that looked as though someone had beaten them with sledgehammers. And so many never returned at all. The Corsair speed became a weapon of the mind. Zero pilots, long accustomed to controlling the fight, now found themselves perpetually reacting. They could no longer dictate the terms of engagement. The Corsairs would appear, slice through formations, and vanish into altitudes beyond the Zero's reach. By the time Japanese pilots gained enough height to engage, the Corsairs were already lining up another diving strike. Major Donald Yost of VMF 213 captured the new reality. We stopped thinking like fighter pilots and began thinking like hunters. Altitude was ammo. Speed was survival. You dove, you fired, you climbed. If a Zero got on your tail, you didn't turn, you shoved the stick forward and left him behind. At 400 knots, nothing could follow a Corsair. The imbalance in training made Japan's dilemma worse. It took 2 years to produce a competent Zero pilot. The delicate craft of dogfighting demanded hundreds of hours of perfect, yet the Corsair's hit-and-run tactics could be learned in months. American aviators, arriving with just 200 hours of flight experience, were triumphing over Japanese veterans with thousands. The aircraft capability bridged the experience gap. By November 1943, Japanese naval aviation faced a critical situation. The elite of their pilot corps was being whittled away by a plane they had once dismissed as too hazardous to operate. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi noted in his Tokyo report, "The enemy has forsaken honorable combat. They strike from advantage and vanish when challenged. Their new fighter is faster than our fastest, climbs higher than our highest, and strikes harder than we can withstand. We are not defeated by superior pilots. We are defeated by superior machines." Production disparities made the calculus even harsher. By the war's end, the U.S. had built 7,829 Corsairs. Japan produced 10,939 Zeros over 4 years and multiple battlefronts. By late 1943, Corsairs were arriving faster in the theater than Zeros could be manufactured. Each lost Japanese pilot represented years of laborious training. Each lost American pilot was replaced within months by 2 more. Commander Minoru Genda, who had once laughed at reports of Americans killing themselves in training, confronted a new reality. In December 1943, after reviewing 6 months of combat data, he wrote, "We mocked their aircraft as too difficult to fly. We failed to see that difficulty was capability. A plane that challenges its own pilots will destroy those who never face such trials. The Corsair is not a dogfighter. It is an executioner." The psychological toll on Japanese aviators was crushing. Lieutenant T.O. Tanemu, one of the few surviving aces, reflected, "In 1942, we owned the skies. Americans feared us. By 1944, we feared them, not their skill, but their machines. You heard that whistle and knew death was diving. You couldn't outrun it. You couldn't outclimb it. You could only attempt to outturn it. And while you turned, another Corsair was already aiming its dive." The U.S. Marine Corps VMF-214, the famed Black Sheep Squadron, proved the Corsair's supremacy in combat from September 1943 to January 1944. In 4 months, they downed 97 Japanese planes while losing only 12 Corsairs, most a ground fire rather than enemy fighters. The numbers were conclusive. The once dominant dogfighting Zero was being hunted to extinction by an aircraft that its pilots had once ridiculed. First Lieutenant Robert Hansen gave the ultimate proof of the Corsair's dominance on January 14, 1944. During a single mission of 1 hour and 45 minutes, he shot down 5 Zeros, not in chaotic malaise, but in 5 deliberate diving attacks. Climb, spot, dive, fire, climb again. The Zeros never got a shot. He returned with 400 rounds still in his guns, his aircraft untouched except for a few paint chips from debris. The era of dogfighting had ended. By war's conclusion, the Corsair's record showed a complete reversal of fortune. F4U pilots claimed over 2,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, against 189 Corsairs lost in air combat, a staggering 11-to-1 kill ratio. The fighter Japanese aviators had mocked as too dangerous to fly had become the most effective American plane in the Pacific. Marine Corps pilots alone accounted for over 1,000 victories flying the bent-wing bird. Captain Philip Dong of VMF-212 summarized the transformation. "The Japanese trained for 20 years to fight the last war, graceful, turning like aerial ballet. We showed up with a sledgehammer. They wanted to dance. We wanted to kill. The Corsair couldn't dance, but it sure could kill. Those 650s would saw a Zero in half before the pilot even knew we were there." The final accounting came from the Japanese Navy itself. By August 1945, of the thousands of aviators who had laughed at early Corsair reports, fewer than 100 remained alive. The rest had learned too late that in modern warfare, speed and firepower outweigh tradition and finesse. The whistle of oil coolers in a diving Corsair had become the sound of Japan's defeat in the air. The lessons of the Pacific endured. Air combat would no longer hinge on turning ability. Speed, altitude, and firepower had become the trinity of fighter design. The Zero, perfectly suited for its time, was trapped in an outdated paradigm. The Corsair, challenging and dangerous, represented the future, where technology could overcome technique, where machine performance could surpass human skill, where the mathematics of war favored industry over ideology. Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's greatest surviving ace, reflected after the conflict. "We laughed when we heard American pilots dying in training. We thought it proved their inferiority. We didn't understand. They were learning to master a machine we could not match. By the time we stopped laughing, most of us were dead." The Corsair showed that in modern war, the hard path in training becomes the easy path in combat. They accepted losses in peace to avoid them in war. We preserved pilots in training and lost them in battle. The mathematics of aerial warfare had changed forever over the Pacific. The Corsair, born dangerous and difficult, evolved into the deadliest fighter of its generation. The Zero, born perfect for its purpose, became obsolete the moment air combat moved beyond turning circles. In the end, the aircraft Japanese pilots mocked for killing its own pilots in training destroyed far more of theirs in combat. The last laugh, delivered through 6.50 caliber guns at 400 knots, belonged to the awkward bent-wing bird that could barely see the runway on takeoff.